My name is Ashley, and this is Let's Talk Dispatch.
I do. You're gonna do it. Do it really well.
And I believe the world needs more dispatchers.
Around in the mud, blood, and
plus
beer.
years that I'm not working 4th of July. 4th of July.
Hey, community policing, right? What about community dispatch?
So on this show, with the help of my guests, we will educate, empower, and support the heroes behind the headset.
Right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch with me, Ashley, the raspy dispatcher. I actually just got back from Hawaii. My fiance is from there, and we got to take a trip back to her home to see her sister's graduation from high school. And it was quite an experience. It was my first lay ceremony. And let me tell you, the folks out there in Hawaii do graduations, right? It was such a good time to, just get away, spend time with family, celebrate someone's accomplishments. But it's also very grounding in realizing just how long ago high school was for me. And I imagine some of you listening are like, Ashley, we don't need to talk about that. But it's also just a wonderful reminder of, how far we've come when we're reflecting on, our lives. And I always, tell my sister-in-law, like, you're 18, you don't need to have it figured out yet. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that a little bit, even now. If you're just getting into this line of work, if you're thinking about exiting this line of work, our lives are short but long, and we don't have to have it all figured out yet. So hopefully listening to our podcast is helping you make some decisions or make some movements, no matter what stage of life you are currently in. And it's also okay not to know what's next or what's coming. Our guest today is the Senior Vice President for Morale Injury Programs at Volunteers of America. They also developed the Resilient Strength Training Program, also known as ReST, to help U.S. military vets cope with moral injury. This evidence-based program now supports healthcare providers, social workers, and others experiencing moral distress and injury. And they are currently working on adapting this program to first responders. My guest today, Dr. Rita Brock. Hi, Dr. Brock.
Hello, Ashley. It's great to be with you.
It's great to be with you as well. I'm so excited to chat with you today. Because you're out there developing programs that help our people, and I'd love to hear more about it and more about you.
Sure. And you can call me Rita.
Rita? All right. I mean,
I used to be a college professor and I got called Dr. Brock, but most of the people I work with call me Rita.
Okay, I will definitely call you Rita. I always joke with my partner about going back and getting our doctorates and stuff, because that's the only doctor that I would be allowed to claim. And they're always like, well, what would make you go back? I'm like, someone really has to upset me because I want to make them call me doctor.
Sometimes you pull rank to get respect, but
exactly.
No, I started college thinking I'd be a neurosurgeon and wound up being a PhD in religion instead.
Well, I don't even think the neurosurgeon program would even let me sit in their study hall. So I'm not what they call a real doctor. I'm a PhD doctor, which is a lot of work too, but it's different. No, for sure.
I don't cut into people or anything.
That would be a problem.
Physically. Right.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved doing the work you do.
Really, the long reason that I think I got into work I do is that my grandfather in Japan was a Buddhist priest, and I grew up there till I was 5 and lived in his house. My mom and I lived in his house. And so I was really, as a child, really close to my grandfather, and he was a Buddhist priest. And the mission of Buddhism is to alleviate suffering. And I think that that's been a subtext in all of my work that I hadn't even thought about until pretty recently, but I got interested in religion because I was interested in the civil rights movement and social justice work, which is a way to talk about a certain kind of suffering. And I worked on and off as a chaplain with high school junior high, and then college students. And I did a lot of spiritual care work as a chaplain. And then I wound up becoming a college professor because I had found college so life-giving and transformative of my life that I wanted to do that for other people as a college professor. And in the meantime, I got interested in trauma work. And as a feminist, I was interested in dealing with violence against women and inequality for women. And so I was doing that kind of thing, as well as doing anti-war work. And especially because I grew up in the Vietnam era, the anti-war thing was really important to me also. And it was really the arrival of the Afghanistan-Iraq wars after 2001 that made me take a look again at why the U.S. winds up in wars like that. And what I realized in that work was that the voices of the military folks who actually get sent by us, because they fight on our behalf, into war are hardly ever part of the conversation. And so I created Truth Commission on Conscience in War, and military veterans testified, some of whom became pacifists because of their military service in Iraq, others who redeployed because they had moral reasons for going. And that's when I learned about moral injury, was doing that because a VA chaplain who was a commissioner knew these people at the VA and Boston, who were at Boston University, that were working on this essay on something called moral injury. And so we got pre-publication copies of that essay to give out to all the commissioners and testifiers. And discovered that a psychiatrist named Jonathan Shea was the first one to work on this topic with military veterans in 1994 when he published a book called Achilles in Vietnam. So we invited him to come and testify, which is how I met him. And he's a psychiatrist for the VA and a neuroscientist, but we got to be friends. And so he helped me organize a planning committee that put together a team that would provide a program for veterans to recover from moral injury, which is really what your conscience does to you when you experience or inflict harm. Right? And so we ran a two-year pilot with a program that Jonathan Shea and his team helped us create, and he was our senior consultant. So anytime I didn't know what to do, I could call him, and he was so generous to do that with us. And we ran a 2-year pilot. And it's evidence-based. We got great data that said the program really had an impact on the lives of the 100 or so veterans that went through it. And so that's how I got into this work. And then COVID hit, and then we
story of all of our lives, right? And then,
and for 5 years ago, because like almost 5 years ago, it hit, and we had to stop. We couldn't use the pilot and the evidence we had from the pilot to grow the program because it was in person. So we took a pause and said, oh no, we can't. Who knows when we'll be able to meet again? And it turned out to be way longer. We thought maybe a year, but it turned out to be 3, right? So we said, well, maybe we could do something online. And we knew that moral injury was going to hit healthcare and everybody because it was so devastating a thing to experience. And so we thought, well, nobody's going to have any time. People are trying to save lives. There's dispatchers and first responders and emergency doctors and nurses and stuff. And so we thought, well, maybe they could do an hour online with us. Maybe we could have something that was just an hour, and we could take the best parts of that program for veterans, which is 5 days. And so we pulled together, and it's a peer facilitated program. It was not a mental health program, even though a psychiatrist helped us create it. They were very clear. It should be peer facilitated. It's not therapy, because you can't fix moral injury. You can't undo a pandemic. It's reality. People are responding to reality. Mental health is when you aren't oriented to reality and you're seeing things or hearing voices that aren't there. This is like a real thing people were responding to. So what you have to do is help them come to terms with it and integrate that experience as part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, well, we can't do that in an hour, but at least we can support them expressing how they're feeling about their moral distress.
Mm-hmm.
And so we created this program called Resilient Strength Time. That's only an hour online. And the acronym for Resilient Strength Time is REST, REST.
That's equals, right?
Yes, equals rest. Yeah, just an hour. And so we were using it with healthcare workers and our own staff and the general public.
Mm.
And then we realized maybe we could single, because veterans wanted their own group because they have a culture and everything. So we had a veteran division of our stuff. We thought maybe the first responders would do better if they had their own area. So we created a separate one for first responders. And so we trained people to be peer facilitators of those hour-long groups who are first responders or have been first responders.
So cool.
And it's still there. It's simple to find. All you have to do is go to voa.org/rest. And you will find information about the general one, the veterans one, and the one for first responders.
So cool. And so for folks who are like just hearing the word moral injury being used, what is it? How is that defined? How would you explain that to someone?
There's several definitions. Somebody said there are now 29 definitions for it or something, because there's been now tests for moral injury in nursing and moral injury in doctors and moral injury in firefighters and police and school kids at school shootings. I mean, there's just a ton of research now on the moral implications of terrible events. And there is even a group, I actually spoke to a group organized that is for people who have killed people by accident. So like in a car accident or in some other way that you didn't intend to kill anybody, but you have moral injury because you feel terrible, like you're an awful person.
Yeah.
So I actually talked to them about moral injury as well. So it can be many kinds of things that happen to a person, and war, for veterans, war being one of the worst. And so it's what happens when you're in a what I would say high stakes situation, which defines the work of first responders and military veterans and doctors and a whole lot of people that work in high stakes. I mean, being the mother of a newborn is high stakes work.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have an entire life dependent on you doing everything right. Right. So even that kind of high stakes situation, things go wrong. And it may be something that you did. That you may have deliberately killed someone in war, or a police person who had to do it on the job because the person was dangerous and had a gun or whatever. But doing that, it even though you were authorized to do it and you had to do it, it isn't anything that a moral human being feels good about.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you have to figure out what you're going to do with that information about yourself. And for some people, they decide that they feel guilty. Maybe it wasn't clear that the person had a gun and you may have killed an innocent person, or you got the wrong house. That's the worst, right? Not the worst, but a terrible thing. So, and then you can feel feelings like guilt and shame or humiliation, or you may have been in a situation where you were prevented from doing the right thing and bad things happen, and you may feel humiliated and frustrated, or even outraged that you got put in that situation. Those are intense feelings. They're not fear feelings, though. They're not PTSD. You don't get guilt and shame and grief and those kinds of things from PTSD. PTSD is your fear center won't calm down, and you have to figure out how to calm it down. And there's good treatment for that. So because PTSD is a kind of disorder, an anxiety disorder. But with moral injury, those feelings of guilt and shame and frustration are appropriate to what happened. But they're really painful. And so people will do everything not to feel those feelings. So they may work all the time so they don't have to think about it, because it's your moral conscience making a judgment about your experience. It's not your fear center, it's your conscience operating. And so to avoid those thoughts, you may work and work to exhaustion all the time and stay too busy to think about it, or you may drink to calm down those feelings, or use drugs, gamble. There's lots of ways people avoid it. The most extreme is to die by suicide. And people who research it in veterans think that moral injury may be the biggest factor in veteran suicide. Not PTSD, not any of that, but moral injury, that sense that I am a terrible human being and I don't deserve to live. Or the good person died who was my partner. I survived. I didn't deserve to survive.
You know, and listening to you to talk about these things, I mean, they're definitely all relevant for the world of first responders. Yep. And I think half the battle, you know, I would imagine for vets and first responders in general is seeking out the services, right? Having the conversations so they can have that light bulb moment. Yeah. And I imagine people listening who haven't sought out services or even haven't gotten access to the correct services yet might be having a light bulb moment, because I think the lack of knowledge, right, or the lack of language to define the things we're feeling can end up us, you know, putting it in a box like you said, like PTSD, thinking, oh, this must be PTSD, or because we don't know that this other option exists. Right. And we don't know what the actual thing is. Yeah. We're gonna have a hard time fixing it.
That's right. And if you have PTSD, there are good fixes for it. It just takes a while and patience, but there are ways to you know, restore your functioning that therapists know about. It's really helpful stuff. But moral injury isn't a disorder. It's your conscience working. I mean, you can't have it if you don't have a conscience. Yeah. Right. So to call it just, you know, like a mental health problem puts it in the stigma of you needing to be fixed. Yeah. And really what you need to happen is to really pay attention to those feelings, find a way to talk to somebody or write about it or do art or to express those feelings so they can come out and you can think about, you can process those feelings in ways that calm them down so they're not so intense and drive your behavior, and to think about the experience in ways that you can integrate it as information about your life, and then become more resilient because it's not burdening you and driving your life. And that kind of processing we think is really helped by peers who understand and empathize, who aren't going to judge you because they know what you've been through. And so that's why we have our online groups. They're peer facilitated, they're small groups, and first responders are the people in there helping people be in those groups together. And there's something magical about being in a group of people who listen to you, validate your experience, understand what you've been through and don't judge you, and offer their own experiences also so you can be empathetic to them. It's a really healing process.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that also hold first responders back from, you know, going and seeking services, I mean, we've definitely reached a level of in the field where we have peer support is offered more widely. I think there are still departments who are still working to get that, you know, base level of support available. But it's definitely more well-known, more well-supported. But that aspect that you're speaking about, being peer-led and being around people who get it, goes a long way. Because if you go talk to, you know, your everyday therapist or counselor, etc., there is a disconnect, right? You know, if you go talk to a doctor and you're like, I feel real sick, and you're like, I'm working 80 hours a week. overnights. Well, they're like, well, don't work the overnights. And you're like, well, wait, someone's got to do it, you know? So
well,
having that level of understanding.
no relationship with a doctor or a therapist, because they're the person who knows what to do, and you're the person who has to be fixed. And you pay for this. Somebody, whether it's your employer, somebody pays for that service, for the 50-minute hour or whatever. And you can get really good help that way, but it's not the same kind of relationship as somebody who's your peer, because you can have that relationship for the rest of your life. I mean, you know, it's not with a therapist that kind of relationship has to end when the therapy ends. And we think that the best support for the healing of moral injury is love. And that's your friends and your peers and your people who you trust not to judge you, so that they can support and hold you as you process these difficult things. And it's really, what I say is, the pain you're in is the good person in you wanting out again. And if you push the pain down and don't deal with it, you will just continue to suffer.
It's true. It's so true. So true.
And, you know, what I know about most veterans and also first responders and people, healthcare people who do this kind of high stakes work are the kind of people who actually want their lives to matter to other people, that they want their life purpose and mission not to be just personal success, which I think is a lack of ambition. And all you want to be is personally successful. That really the thing that makes people flourish is the relationships they have. And if your life purpose is the kind of relationship where you actually save lives, that's huge. Which means you really are a good person, but you can get yourself in a state where you don't know that anymore.
So for dispatchers, you know, obviously we're not going into the field. We're not, you know, going hands-on with folks out there. Would you say that on the phone experience, where they're having to make decisions of who to send, what to do, how to words to say, would have that same type of
stakes of all, right? If you can't get the help there, what good is it, right? So if I can imagine a lot of frustrating calls where you can't determine what's happening or exactly what's going on or where the person is, and then as soon as you can figure out what to do and send something, then you go on to the next call, right? You don't necessarily see the ending. Right. So I think you also carry a lot of unresolved stories, right? You don't know, or maybe you blew it and you sent the police to the wrong place because the person didn't give you something happened and you just didn't get the address right. And something really bad goes down. And the other thing is, you may not be there in person, but sometimes you hear it.
Yeah.
Right. You hear it happen. And there's in the sense that there's nothing you can do, that can be horrible. So I think that dispatchers are just as susceptible to moral injury as the person who shoots up the wrong house.
Yeah.
Right. So because you have responsibility in a high stakes situation. And having responsibility means that you can make mistakes or things can go wrong you can't do anything about, but you still feel terrible about them. I remember, this isn't a dispatcher story, but I remember reading a story about the people who sit by the phone at a prison execution.
Oh my gosh.
And their only job is to wait until the time of the execution, to wait in case the governor or the president or whoever calls to stay the execution, to stop the execution.
Oh my gosh.
And if you don't get the call and send the message immediately to the prison, a person could die that didn't have to die. And that's like, no, you're not in either place. You're not with the governor. You're not in the prison. You're just sitting by the phone, maybe by yourself or with a team, but you're sitting by the phone with that level of responsibility. And it really wrecks people.
Yeah.
Because like they feel so awful if they fail.
Yeah.
You know, and even if they get through on time, the tension, the stress of waiting for a half an hour before the execution in case it gets stopped.
You know, I feel like these are one of those moments where, and I feel like I have them a lot having this podcast, is when you talk to someone, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that being a job. Like who rock, paper, scissored for that assignment? Because, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think anyone's like, I'll wait by the phone, because you're right. It is such
it's horrible.
It has
turns
nothing
out
to do with you,
even
but
the people
everything
who
to do with you.
even the people who do the executions are sort of often coerced into working them.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do these things, right?
No.
No, you want to save lives. You want to protect people. You want to do the right thing. And so I think as dispatchers, to be in the middle of those situations, and you're sort of you are the ones that make the connections to have the work be able to be done.
And
so
I think, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's not the same exact, but it's a little more like being an Air Force pilot and dropping a bomb. You don't really see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. You just fly on it. If you don't get shot down, you did it. But you don't see the kill. You don't really actually know exactly what happened until there's a report.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I say often, is that's kind of the difference between patrol or field responders and 911 dispatchers, is that when I send my officer to a high priority call, you know, shooting, violent crime, you know, they're going to be on that for a half, or if not their whole shift. You know, they might be tied up on that one call.
Right.
But, you know, I hang up and now I'm on the other call, and then another call and another call.
Yeah.
It's not to say one's worse than the other. It's just different, you know, right? Like it's just simply different. Of
the accumulated calls, right? Because you don't, it's not like you have a horrible call and then you get a half hour to process.
Yeah.
Right? You just call after call after. So there's an accumulated kind of moral distress, I think, because you don't really have time to take it in.
Yeah.
I remember a friend she said her sister was a ER chaplain. Well, in a hospital, she was a chaplain, and she would hear a code blue, which is like somebody's dying. Yeah. And so the team has to go there. The code blue team goes there, and they do their best to save somebody. And if the patient dies, the doctor calls it, they immediately start stripping down to go to the next call, taking the equipment down. And she decided she started asking them to just pause after the doctor called the death, and said to the team, would you just give me 1 minute, please? 1 minute. And she would offer a prayer for the patient and their family, of sorrow and comfort. And then she would offer a thanks prayer, a generic kind of prayer, for the team that worked so hard to save that life. Gratitude for that team. And then amen.
Yeah.
And that minute to take it in meant so much to people, they started calling her the Minute Chaplain.
Right? Hey, that's a podcast name right there. You know?
Right. But for dispatchers, you don't have even 10 seconds, right? It's just you're picking up call after call after call.
Some of these centers, for sure.
With people in deep distress, not at their best, sometimes really messed up. And you have to figure out and sort all of that out without any real cushion, as it were. So rest is 1 hour you could take at the end of a shift.
Yeah.
And just unload.
So cool. Yeah. You know, one thing that I think that we've kind of touched on a little bit, and that I don't think we get, in the sense of like when big incidents happen and they're reported on, is that reality that you're talking about, is like when a bad thing happens, whether it's negligence or they had to make a split decision, so on and so forth, tons of reasons, that aspect after it, you know, that decision that was made, and how that affects that person, or even the dispatcher who sent that call out. Like that's something I think about when I see, things that are reported on the news, is like someone had to drop the call for people to respond out. And I think that's something that we deal with a lot in our centers. When we talk to people, we try to really, that's why we ask questions as dispatchers, right? I had another person on the podcast last week. The episode went out last week, and we talked about DEI, and they're actually doing a study on folks who call and they use the word suspicious. Someone will call and be like, someone's in my neighborhood, they're suspicious. And then, we as a dispatchers should be asking more questions, because we have to actually have reasons to go out and contact people, right? Like people, we don't want to just go bother people for existing genuinely. And people need to be able to articulate what is actually suspicious, because just existing and you haven't seen them before is not a reason for police contact. So we try really hard to make sure that what we're going out for actually meets our criteria, because people existing, even like unhoused folks, or those things just existing in that way, it's not criminal. Like being an addict is not a crime, right? But shooting up on the sidewalk, we're probably going to go make contact about that. So really,
it's not a crime to be in a hoodie and be black and have Skittles in your hand and a drink and walk home.
Exactly.
Like that.
So we as dispatchers should be and do ask a lot of questions to make sure we're not going and contacting people just for existing. And I think when we drop calls and they do escalate and turn out badly, I think that does weigh really heavy on us.
The failure to prevent harm can be as intense as inflicting harm. Because you know that terrible things happened and you had a hand in it. You didn't prevent it. That's one of the definitions for moral injury is the challenge to identity and core moral values from perpetrating, failing to prevent, or witnessing harm. So even witnessing it, just hearing it on the phone, like, right? It's a kind of witness. So the thing I think that it's important to know is if those things, and you can harden yourself so they just go by and you don't feel anything, but that is at a cost to your own humanity. And most people will feel something, and that's important. That's your humanity still there. It's just not pleasant. Suffering isn't. I mean, the world has a lot of suffering in it. And if you're the kind of person who goes into first responder work, you're likely to care that there's suffering in the world and want less of it. And when you don't succeed in stopping harm, you can suffer yourself.
It's true. It's very, very, very true.
And that's okay. It's like, it's not a weakness. It is a terrible pain, but it's not a weakness. It's a strength of your humanity, and also something you do have to work through, or it will weigh you down. It's like in the Buddhist metaphor, it's like you have an anchor that's the weight of your suffering, and if you can't find a way to let go of that anchor, you will constantly suffer. And so you have to do something to help yourself let go. Not deny, not eliminate, not fix, but let go.
It's true. So for the Resilience Strength Training Program, if someone was going to get involved in it, going to start utilizing it, what are they going to expect? What are they going to see, happening when
Well,
they
first of
join?
all, you go to the site and you register for an account so they can send you a reminder of when you have
We need
a
those.
session, right? And then once you create an account, you can see the schedule of when they're happening,
Okay.
and you can sign up for a time that works with your schedule. And we try to have them varied enough so that people who do shift work can find one. And because we know first responders do 24/7, right? So one of our popular times is Sunday evening, but we have different times for people, and you sign up for that schedule. And if it's full, there's a wait list also, and usually people on the wait list get in anyway. But and then they send you a reminder of when that you're scheduled, and you just go online, you log in with your account, and you go online, and you're put into what is basically looks like a Zoom room.
Okay.
And there are two facilitators. There are usually two facilitators in there co-facilitating. And so they'll welcome you and say a little bit about moral distress, and then explain the guidelines, which is nothing leaves the space. It's confidential. If you don't want to use your real name, you can put a different name in, but you have to turn your camera on so they can see you. But you can use a different name if you don't want people to know who you are. But they just need to be able to call on you, see your name on the, like whatever your AKA is. They have
The
to be able to
raspy
see it.
dispatcher.
Yeah, right. And then they will explain about the way the listening happens and people share, which is, we call it deep listening, which is you listen with an open heart and quiet mind. So you don't comment, make judgments, or ask questions. You just listen with an open heart and take in what somebody says in that kind of compassionate, empathetic way. And so after that, they do instruction in mindful breathing, which actually is useful to calm stress in your body. It's been shown that it drops the cortisol level in your body. And so they take you through instructions in doing deep breathe, this particular kind of breathing technique. After that, usually there's a guided meditation or a way to help you remember what you came to talk about. And then they invite people to share what they'd like to share from the experience they need to process. And as each person speaks, and people can volunteer, or they just go through the tiles on the screen and say, would you like to share? And you're not required to share. It's not a, like you have to be there to share. You can participate by just supporting other people and listening. And that can be very valuable. But as soon as each person shares, there's just a little silence so everybody can really take it in. And then the next person shares. And so after everybody has a chance to share in that way, if there's time, people can reflect on things they heard, or give each other support, or do a little bit of interacting. And then there's just a little blessing statement at the end, sort of like a benediction. And that's it.
That's so cool.
It's very simple.
And I was going to ask about the anonymity part. What, you don't have to do your real name or anything. You do have to turn your camera on, because it's just weird when you can't see people. It's true.
Making that optional. We tried making that optional, because sometimes people's bandwidth is bad and it's hard to turn their video on. But some of the facilitators had groups where no one turned their camera on, and they said it was so weird. We couldn't see anybody. We couldn't see what was happening. We decided, oh no, we need cameras on. People don't have to give their names, but we do need to see something there. Also, because we didn't want anybody trying to hurt themselves, right? Right. You don't ever know who's going to show up and what state they're in. So, and the facilitators are trained enough to, if they see somebody that's in trouble, they have a way to, we have backup clinicians that support them. And we have ways to make an intervention if they think somebody's not ready to be in the group, that they're in distress and need more help.
Yeah. And I do appreciate the fact that people can just show up and listen.
Yep.
I think sometimes, you can tell someone it's okay to share and it's okay to feel the feelings, and but actually witnessing it, like witnessing people doing it, I think is really empowering in itself.
It is. And often people that don't speak right away, they think they're not going to share, but then after they hear everybody else, they want to share.
Yeah.
Right. So
know?
you have to share, but it can be really inspiring just to listen.
Yeah. The power
Um,
of peers, right?
yeah.
The power of seeing folks who get it, do it. And
Yeah. And
it
just
really
hearing
goes a long
someone
way.
else who had a really similar experience to yours can really be heartening. Like, I am not the only person in the world that had this happen and it feels this way.
Mhm, mhm.
And just realizing you're not alone and you're not weird for feeling the way you feel and you're not bad for having had that experience. Those are really important insights to have that help you realize that the suffering you're in isn't a punishment. It's not because you're bad.
And if folks connect, can folks connect with each other? Is there a way to?
If people want to, that's possible in the group. The facilitator, if somebody says to someone else, "Can we get together and talk on the phone or something?"
Mhm.
If each person agrees, then they can put their phone. They can share phone numbers, or
Okay.
if they're from the same company, they we don't know who shows
Yeah.
up, but it's a national program, so
Yeah.
you're not likely to see somebody in a group. But if you do, it's a nice way to connect to them.
Okay.
But people can follow up. We have some groups where people are sort of regulars.
Okay.
Yeah, like every week they show up at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of options. You can bounce around in the week and try different groups. If you didn't find one that worked for you, you could try again. Or you might find a time that is the best time for you. And then there are other people also that are there. It's not programmed in any way. It's sort of random who comes.
Awesome.
But one of I think the values of this program is that a mental health therapist is trained to handle mental health problems. And there's some evidence from veterans that if a person is also experiencing moral injury, it can negatively impact the mental health treatment. So it's actually a value added if you are having PTSD symptoms and you are seeing a mental health therapist for help, which is not a bad thing. And we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. But if you also come to the ReST program, it could actually improve your progress. If you have moral injury, it could improve your progress in your mental health program. One time in our veterans group, we had a veteran who had been sent for 6 weeks to a veterans center, mental health center, for a particular issue that this veteran was really struggling with. And there was help. The help was useful to the veteran, but they still felt awful.
Yeah.
And they were still seeing a psychiatrist, and there was just something that like they were sort of stuck. And they heard about our program for veterans. And so they actually skipped their psychiatric appointment that week to attend our program and didn't tell their psychiatrist they were doing it. And they whoa, yeah. So we didn't know that, because we usually tell them, if you're seeing a mental health therapist, get permission, right? But this person chose not to get permission, and then they went through the program, and they felt so great at the end of it that when they went back for their appointment to the psychiatrist the next week, they told the psychiatrist, "I didn't come last week because I went to this program. I wanted to try it. I was afraid you would tell me not to do it. So I went and did it anyway." And then handed the psychiatrist a little brochure about it and said, "I want you to know it was really, really helpful to me. And now these are the things I need my help from you for." And the psychiatrist said, "Oh, thank you. I will be a better psychiatrist for you, knowing what you need." So
that's what we need. Yes.
Right? So, because moral injury is not a disorder, but it's a kind of suffering that can make other things worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we love a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, that
all of the above. Right. All of the numbers, right? But if something in you is so weighing you down that that all the help people are trying to give you, you can't quite get there. That might be moral injury. And we actually had in one of our educational programs a chaplain who was working out of a psychiatric hospital. And she noticed that as people got well and they were going home, they started to feel bad because they started to get moral injury. They started to realize how much harm they'd caused their families from their mental illness. And so she designed a program to help people being discharged understand moral injury and be able to recognize it if they were feeling it and to process it.
Yeah. And I imagine that, you know, folks who are coming out of rehab or folks that are, you know, probably have that same
thing, right? Yeah. I wondered, you know, the golfer that recently died by suicide, that was 30 and is a really successful golfer. He had been struggling with an addiction problem. And I wondered if maybe, because he had gotten support and he'd gotten sober, I wondered if maybe part of what he was struggling with was moral injury.
Interesting.
I know a lot of veterans who have tried to die by suicide, and they've been in our moral injury programs. And we had one group where the facilitator, the peer facilitator, had put a bullet in his own heart.
Oh, wow.
And so he was willing as a facilitator but this is what you don't do as a therapist, is self-disclose.
Yeah.
Right. So, but a peer can say, I tried to kill myself and here's how. And so at the end of, I'm not in the groups. I just observe the program. But at the end of the week, when they got their certificates, he stood up in front of the group and he said, I am pledging today that I will not die by my own hand. And I'm inviting anybody who wants to join me to come up here. 5 members of his group came up there.
So great.
Right. Yeah.
Man, just amazing, right? I mean, knowledge is just so powerful, you know,
it is. And we care about first responders. We care about dispatchers because they're part of the whole team process. And we need more people, not fewer.
Yeah.
And so we just know that moral injury is a factor in the risks that you take when you do the work and you're a good person. And we don't want people to wind up leaving their careers or taking themselves out because it was preventable, that they could have processed what they're feeling and come back to themselves in a way and been able to show back up again and as their best selves at work.
Amazing. And so I had another question about the VOA ReST for first responders. I have a feeling it might be the same thing we're talking about, or is it something different?
No, it's ReST for first responders. It's for dispatchers, for ER doctors, for EMTs, paramedics.
Yeah.
There's a whole list of people who are like the first people there, the trying to rescue, save. And, you know, the other group that nobody ever thinks about that I've suddenly become aware of is people who do animal rescue.
Oh, yeah. Animal rescue.
I mean, it's not just people that need rescuing. We had a case here in Minnesota recently that was sort of shocking, where a woman had 100 cats in her house.
Oh my gosh.
And they were in the ducts in the walls, and about and 30% of them had respiratory illnesses, and 9 had to be put down. So the animal rescuers had to go in and take all of these cats, and there's, you know, like find shelters for them. And it was really devastating because it was a desperate situation. It was filthy. The cats were not well. I mean, it's just horrible. And they're often encountering highly abused animals, and you see the worst of human cruelty.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. Right. And I hadn't even thought about them as kind of first responders, but they kind of are.
You know, another group that came up in another interview that I did is our CSI. They I feel like are just kind of forgotten about a little bit,
Yeah.
and they are seeing it, smelling it, taking pictures of it, touching
Yeah.
it. They for sure
Yeah.
are involved in this process and are
Yeah.
a huge part of bringing folks in justice.
Yeah.
If they do their job
Absolutely.
wrong, it has big
Yeah.
repercussions. So
Yeah. It
them
turns
as well.
out one of the veterans I got to know in Texas was in a mortuary unit for the Marine Corps.
Wow. Yeah.
She was in the early group in the Marine Corps, and she was not in the combat zone. She was in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
I think was Qatar or one of the other countries, but they would take, her job was to take boxes with body parts in them or body bags and clean them up so they could go home, be
Yeah.
shipped home. And she said she grew up in a minister's family, had been to a lot of funerals, and she thought this wouldn't bother her or anything. And so she said the boxes that had body parts, because there was a lot of explosions and things,
Yeah.
she was okay with that, putting that, cleaning it up, putting it in a nicer container and shipping it home. But the thing that she had nightmares about, that haunted her, was when she got a body that was an intact body and it had been in the back of a truck for, like in 100-degree heat for a day or two. And the body bag had kind of melted all over the features of this body. And so she said she could see this person in front of her, and it was like a ghost.
Yeah.
And so that, for some reason, just really made her aware that it was human beings that, and so it was just really hard on her.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And I've talked to other people who are in mortuary units also who found that really hard and terrible to do.
Just the amount of jobs and things and, like levels that you can be involved in, people first service is just, that's probably another thing people don't think about, is like how folks get home, like how they get, prepared to be sent home after situations like that. It's just,
well, and you can have people who are completely ungrateful and nasty.
True.
Right. You deal with the worst kinds of the public as well as the best, right? So that's also like infuriating. I mean, it can make you feel really outraged and cynical.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
True.
So there's a whole bunch of things around people in dire situations that are put you at risk for moral injury.
Well, Rita, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I have learned so much. And one of the last questions that I always ask everybody who comes onto the show is, what advice would you give someone, and for you, considering a career as a first responder in general?
Honor your desire to be of worth to other people. And also honor your own soul and take good care of it.
I love it. It's such great advice. And I love the work you're doing. This thing that you've created is only going to continue to help people, continue to help more people. And I know it's already helped so many people already. So, Rita, thank you so much for reaching out, coming onto the show. And maybe one more time, let's throw out the website information for folks to find this awesome.
Just go and find a group and take care of your soul. Yes, it's www.v as in Victor, voa.org/REST, REST.
Awesome. And I will also throw that information in the episode description for all of you folks. And I'm actually going to start putting together a tab on my website that lists all of these cool resources we find throughout our episodes. So, Rita, again, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. I'll be right back with you. All right, everybody. That was a wonderful episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch. Honestly, guys, I love the show for obvious reasons, but mostly because I get to meet folks like Rita, learn about things that impact our line of work, and ultimately help us. So definitely check out the website voa.org/rest. If you're wanting to learn more, meet people who get it, who've been there. Again, I will put all of that information in this episode description. If you're interested in coming onto the show, head to theraspydispatcher.com. And until next time, everybody, stay raspy. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Dispatch podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're interested in becoming a guest on the show, or maybe even submitting your own story, you can do all that and more at theraspydispatcher.com. Until next time, stay raspy.